How I Escaped Colorado 12 years ago. Before we begin, I have extremely important advice. If you are walking alone in the woods or any remote area, and suddenly everything around you goes absolutely silent, stop what you are doing. You only have a few seconds to act. Stop and kneel down, face down on the ground, and cover the back of your neck. Close your eyes and breathe slowly. Do not move. And even if you hear something, absolutely do not open your eyes. With any luck, you will not be noticed. That situation will be over in a few minutes. If you hear a bird singing or wind rustling through the leaves, you should be fine. When you feel ready, slowly let go of your hands from your head, open your eyes, and make sure you're still in the same place as before it happened. If you open your eyes and suddenly find yourself in a completely different place, well, the rest of this is for you. I sincerely hope it helps. This method is not a sure shot, but it's the best advice I can give. And I really wish I had known that when it happened to me. Let me warn you, this is a long story, but I will try to summarize it in a few posts to reach as many people as possible. It has taken a lot of time to prepare myself mentally to tell this story, but now I feel I must because I know I'm not the only one. 12 years ago, I was a counselor for a Christian youth camp in the mountains of Colorado. I was 20 then, and it was my 4th summer there. I love this place. I've been attending every year since I was 12. It's a standard youth camp with a lake nearby, arts and crafts, and trekking trips. The salary is very low, but that's not the point. I do it because I genuinely love this job. The children and the staff are great, and I have only nice words to say about them. I think some of them may still blame themselves for what happened, but they shouldn't. No one could have known what was out there. I am an early riser, usually waking up at dawn to take on the local trails before the day's activities begin. That day was no different. After filling the coffee pot, I set off as soon as the sunrise began to cover the ground with a garish red-orange color. There is a path there that everyone calls the Rendezvous Trail. It's a circle of about 3 miles over rough terrain. The rows of trees close in, making it difficult to see where you've been or where you are going. This makes it difficult to determine your location, which becomes quite disorienting. As long as you stick to the path, you will eventually be led back to camp. Just when you're sure you're lost and about to call a search party, you're back at camp. That's the motto. A part of the path leads to a beautiful view of the Colorado Plains, overlapping from a high position on the Rocky Mountains. That is the main reason why I like walking there. I was walking alone on the trail that day, as I had done dozens, if not hundreds of times before. I reached the top, stopped to rest, and enjoyed the view for a while before continuing the way back. On the way back, I suddenly noticed something unusual. It was a summer morning in early August and warming up quickly. However, the birds were not chirping, and the everyday sounds of insects and the background noise of the forest were absent. I stopped and listened for a moment. My confusion grew. Nothing at all, just absolute silence. I could almost hear my heart beating. A feeling that I can only describe as a strange, surreal, and unexplainable dread suddenly came over me. I always found the next part difficult to describe. It started like a dizzy feeling in my eyes and a discomfort in my chest. The trees and the surrounding road seemed to vibrate, then twist and stretch. The earth looked like it was breathing in and out. I first thought that I was having a seizure or a stroke. It felt like everything suddenly stopped being real. I felt a severe headache, and within seconds it became so painful that I fell to the ground. I pressed my hands to my face and prayed for it to end. I felt enormous pressure from all around, pressing on every square centimeter of my body. It all happened so fast, and the memories are faint. It felt like my body was about to explode from the inside, as if I was being turned inside out, sliding over a black hole that was folded like origami. As unpleasant as it sounds, the only real pain was the throbbing headache that culminated between my eyes. The whole world was in complete, indescribable chaos for a few moments. I thought I was going to die, but then it stopped. I suddenly regained my composure, finding myself on all fours in the dust. But the world had gone dark. I staggered to my feet and almost fell back down. The sunlight from before had disappeared, and there was no trace of the road I had just walked. I was in a forest, but it was not the same place. Everything was different. The environment was dark, but I could still see very clearly. I looked up at the sky and realized the sky was completely black. I thought I had just passed out for a few hours, but then I realized there were no stars, no moon. But there was something else. It looked like a giant, shimmering green circle surrounding a dark sphere. The black sphere in the center might have just been empty space, but in that moment, I thought it was some kind of weird eclipse. The green light from the circle shone down on the vicinity, giving the scene a strange, unearthly color. I took a closer look at the vegetation. They were different from any plant I had ever seen. The bark on the trees was smooth and serrated, fitting together in an almost perfectly symmetrical fashion. They protruded in small semicircles, arranged in rows across the entire tree, like armor. The leaves felt more like plastic than plants. I almost panicked in that moment, realizing I was completely unaware of where I was or what had brought me here. My first thought was that I had died and woken up in hell. However, the surrounding area seemed to contradict that idea. I was always taught that hell was hot, with endless fire. I didn't see anything like that. The air wasn't even particularly hot or cold. I was wearing brown cargo shorts, a simple black t-shirt, and thick walking shoes. In my bag, sunglasses, lip balm, a pocket knife, a pocket Bible, and a pack of gummy bears. I didn't even have a phone with me. I doubt it would have made much difference. I took out the compass and saw the needle was pointing straight behind me. My last remembered position was south of camp, meaning in theory I should be able to go north and return. But when I turned around, the compass didn't reorient itself. I shook it and the needle spun wildly. It wasn't pointing north, it was pointing nowhere. I didn't know how to explain that, but I still felt I had to do something, so I started walking. No animal sounds, no wind. There was only complete silence, except for the sound I made on the ground. The whole area was covered with that strange green light, making everything look a bit like the bottom of a muddy pond. It felt almost like a vivid dream as I passed by that strange place. The trees seemed to stretch and curl up, taller and more twisted than any tree I had ever seen. I found myself almost trapped, staring up at them, fearful that something was up there, looking back and waiting to strike. Suddenly, in the distance, I heard something. I couldn't tell where or what, but I could hear something moving. I heard it fly up, but the tall trees blocked my view. I could tell it was coming closer, and it scared the hell out of me. The trees started rustling violently in front of me, and I quickly bent down into a small hollow. I curled up tight like a ball and prayed I wouldn't be seen. Then I heard what I can only describe as a buzzing sound, like a giant bird, as it suddenly flew overhead. I saw the trees rustling violently and heard the sound of a branch breaking. I hugged myself tighter and prayed it would pass. My prayer was granted because whatever it was, it just flew by. I stayed hidden for a few more minutes, but finally emerged, only to be met with an alarming sight. About 30 yards ahead, a dense gray fog appeared and began to head forward. It only took a second for me to realize it was coming towards me, and fast. I stood up and started running. I thought maybe it was smoke, but I didn't see or smell any fire. It moved fast, and it was clear I wouldn't be able to outrun it. With few other options, I quickly grabbed a tree and started climbing. The jagged bark scratched my hand, but I didn't notice at the time. I saw the fog approaching from the corner of my eye and tried to climb faster. It reached me in only a few moments, obscuring everything. At that time, I felt dizzy, and my eyelids became heavy, as if the fog was covering me. Strength seemed to be sucked out of my arms, and my legs trembled beneath me as I clung to the tree trunk. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to surrender to the sleep that was calling. I was seconds away from letting go when suddenly I felt something grab my bare ankle. A cold hand, rough as sandpaper. A rush of adrenaline suddenly hit my heart like thunder and gave me the strength to fight back. I kicked violently as adrenaline and fatigue fought each other inside me. I finally kicked my way free and rushed up the tree. I just kept climbing and didn't stop until I could see the green light in the sky again. I looked down and realized the fog had swallowed everything in the vicinity. I don't know what it was that had grabbed me, and I hope I never find out. The feeling of sleepiness was gone. The fog swirled under me like a stormy gray sea. Sounds also emanated from there, strange whispers, sudden screams, and a foaming sound, all at random. I don't know how long I waited up there, but it was at least a few hours. At some point, I looked down and realized the fog was finally dissolving. After making sure it was gone, I carefully climbed down. I still didn't know where I was, but I knew I had to keep moving. My footsteps seemed even less welcome than before. I was constantly nervous, waiting for the fog to return. But luckily, it never did. The strange silence was back, and I was truly lonely. Everything remained the same for hours as I wandered through the empty, silent clearing. At that time, I began to think that I was in a strange, extremely vivid dream state. Or maybe I had really died and this place was a kind of purgatory, or hell. So many things ran through my mind, but something told me to continue. I guess basic survival skills, because I knew in the end I would need to find water and food. I finally found a new location. When the trees of the dark forest finally thinned out, I rushed through and saw a wide open field ahead on a downward slope. The altitude must have been high because I was suddenly able to see for miles. That was when I truly understood that I was very far from home. In front of me was a vast field with long, distant albino grass, and beyond that, what looked like a swamp. I saw mountains maybe 100 miles away, and a giant lake. I saw things flying in the air and things moving far in the distance with strange, disturbing movements. Luckily, they were far away, but something curious was much closer. A tower. A giant square stone block protruding from the ground towards the black sky. It was at least a few miles away and several hundred meters high. Its architecture consisted of confusing spirals, green and thorny pictograms, and a mysterious black color that made it look completely, indescribably scary. In that moment, I was so surprised and confused that I actually laughed. Maybe my mind was starting to crack, or maybe I was absurdly thinking that I had somehow gotten lost in Mordor or an Oblivion portal from the Elder Scrolls series. The thought quickly passed because the tower really didn't look like any of those. Honestly, it didn't look like anything humans had ever built. But that seemed impossible. Someone must have built it. I felt drawn to it, as if it were my only hope of safety. It was the only thing I'd found that even vaguely resembled human civilization, so I started the journey towards it. I had not gone more than 20 steps into the steppe when I heard something stirring in the forest on the left. Broken branches, a low thump, then hit my eardrums, almost a sound in the lowest possible range. It instantly created goosebumps on my skin, and the hair on my neck stood up. It's as if my body was biologically predisposed to fear that noise. I didn't intend to stay and see what made it, and I ran towards the long grass. I saw the grass was as tall as a corn plant when I got there. I turned back and heard something rushing through the trees behind at breakneck speed. A big shadow on two legs, like thunder, then broke out from the trees, growling and clawing. The ground shook with every step it took, and it was heading straight for me. I lunged into the tall grass, panting and groping blindly. No sense of direction in there, but anywhere was better than facing whatever was chasing me. The blades of grass beat against me as I ran, cold and almost sharp to the touch. I felt scratches on my face and arms, but not for a moment did I let the pain overwhelm me. The grass thinned after a minute or two, and I staggered out into an open swamp. In front of me was the vast swamp I had seen before, and behind me the scary demon continued the chase. Its roar seemed to shake the bones in my chest. A giant, or something much stranger. I looked desperately around, heart beating in my chest as the thing got closer. Then I saw it, a small ditch on the left. I took the opportunity and ran towards it. I rushed in, landing clumsily on my shoulder in a pile of mud and rotten plants. I heard the beast break through the grass stalks, and I bent down under the swampy water to avoid its gaze. I heard that gloomy roar, accompanied by footsteps. I saw golden, shimmering, reptilian eyes, but luckily they were not looking at me. It smelled horrible, but it was better than the smell of the monster's stomach. I listened as it thrashed for a few more minutes before it finally seemed to lose interest and wander off. Its footsteps faded away, and my mind began to spin. This is impossible. This can't be real. This is a nightmare. No matter how many times I screamed it in my head, I couldn't wake up. That thing, the monstrous lizard, that chased me. I know what it was, but I didn't dare to believe it. It sounds crazier now as I type this out than when I thought it in that moment, but it's unmistakable. It was a dinosaur. A T-Rex is what I thought at the time, but probably a different species because of the crest on its head. I know it sounds crazy, but I know what I saw. Before I could really think about what I saw, I felt something slip past my foot in the water. I didn't even wonder, and in about half a second I jumped out of my hiding spot. Luckily for me, the lizard was gone. Silence came back again. It feels like my heart is being clamped, my limbs are numb, and I felt my vision spinning. I thought it was a heart attack, but looking back now, I realize it was a panic attack. I fell to the ground crying, begging, and praying with all my power. My heart ached so much it felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. I refused to believe it was real and decided to take decisive measures to wake myself up from the coma or dream I believed I was in. I pulled out my pocket knife and opened the blade. With trembling hands, I pressed it against the inside of my arm and slid the blade horizontally. It hurt like 1,000 wasps stinging as the skin split and blood flowed. The pain was intense, but nothing compared to the terrible realization. This is not a dream. This is real. Was I thrown back in time? What madness has created such a lonely world? I had to go home. I tore the sleeve from my shirt and tried to bandage the self-inflicted wound. My mind was still racing, my heart pounding. Then my eyes met the only thing in sight that represented a glimmer of hope, the tower. I must go to the tower. I pulled myself up. Before me was a vast, dirty swamp. Luckily, there seemed to be a few fallen logs and mounds that looked at least somewhat stable. I looked around and saw no sign of the lizard, so I entered the swamp. I tiptoed and dodged through mounds of earth and decomposed matter. The water looked barren, stagnant, and covered with green algae, completely crushing any hope of drinking from there. At certain points, I saw big bubbles rise from the depths. My skin crawled imagining what was creating them down there. Luckily, I managed to get through the swamp without incident. On the other side, the swamp eventually gave way to another forest. Above, I could see the towering building somewhere in the distance, and I knew I had no other choice besides venturing through a forest again. The trees appeared to be smaller than the ones I passed through before, but were no less scary. Soon, the swamp behind me was obscured again by foliage. There is no real way I can describe the absolute silence. You never notice how comfortable the background noise of daily life is until it's taken away. It's almost crazy to endure, but this time it didn't last. Ahead, a sudden groan made me duck behind a tree. I looked around, but saw nothing. The groaning then got a little louder, and it started to sound like someone was crying, like a child. It must be human instinct that motivated me to try and find it, because the thought of a lonely, scared child in that place was really heartbreaking. I crawled forward on my belly, trying to avoid being seen by anything that might be lurking. Luckily I did, because as I crawled over the protruding tree roots, I saw something in the distance. There was a shadow wandering about 30 yards ahead, long arms hanging down from a slender, wobbly frame. It looked almost human, but the more I stared, the more I realized its proportions were completely wrong. It was taller and thinner than any person I had ever seen, and the crying, it was coming from that thing. It was crying miserably, but it seemed insincere. Its body movements didn't seem to show it was suffering. It just wandered around waving its arms. It was as if it was just imitating the sound or using it as a ploy to lure someone. Maybe I'm just crazy, but anyway, I didn't decide to take the risk and find out if that thing was friendly or not. I just bent down there, avoiding its eyes, and looked at the trees. My heart then skipped a beat in my chest when I saw eyes looking back at me. Big, black, magical-looking orbs glistening in the green light, looking down on me from above. It was about 10 feet up a tree, looking straight down at me, its body upside down. The creature's body appeared almost cat-like, but it really wasn't like any animal I had ever seen. Its head was sharp, almost triangular, and its big eyes looked scarier than any cat I had ever seen. It had strange spikes on its shaggy back, and a forked tail wagged in the air as it hung by platinum-curved claws. We just stared at each other, motionless for what seemed like forever. The staggering thing continued to lament and cry in the back, and I tried to come up with a plan. I knew running was the worst thing I could do, as most big cats will consider you prey if you run. I was frozen. A low growl echoed from the throat of the beast on the tree, and I knew it was thinking of dinner. I don't even know what came over me then. Could be the continuous collapse of my spiritual strength, the adrenaline rush, or the frustration with the situation. I stood up, as if to challenge that cat, and screamed as loud as I possibly could, like a war cry. It sounded more like a hoarse hiss, and I could hear the horror in it. The beast didn't hesitate at all, but something else did. The tall, humanoid figure suddenly shrieked and rushed towards me at a terrible speed. Its vaguely human-like face split open to reveal 4 jaws like a Venus flytrap. Right when it was a few feet away, I rushed to one side, and the humanoid figure rushed straight past me, crashing into another tree. It groaned and stopped, but showed no sign of physical pain, no matter how hard the impact. In other circumstances, it might even be funny, but in that moment, it revealed important information. It was blind. I picked up a rock and threw it at the animal in the tree. The rock hit its back, and it roared back in rage. I saw its mouth open to reveal many rows of small, serrated teeth. The lanky humanoid figure then jerked its head up, alerted by the roar. In a flash, it lunged at the tree, using its long arms and legs for quick climbing. The cat creature hissed and clawed at the humanoid jaws as it approached, but the humanoid figure didn't even flinch. It grabbed the cat, tore it off the tree, and made them both fall to the ground. They hit hard, but both of them stood up immediately. The humanoid figure rushed in and tried to wrap around the cat. Its arms and legs bent at impossible angles to a human, looking like a strange snake trying to apply a stranglehold. The cat roared and thrashed around, quickly escaping the clamp. Then it reversed the situation, lunging at the humanoid's mech with its teeth. I was temporarily mesmerized by the conflict, but quickly realized it was an opportunity to escape. I ran like crazy, hearing the sound of the two beasts continuing their battle as I created distance between them. A minute later, I heard the scream of the humanoid thing ring out loudly before silence returned. I kept moving deeper into the cursed forest. There were some trees that looked different from the rest, twisted and deformed as if they grew from a radiation machine or something. Some tree trunks actually bent into an arc, stretching tens of feet high before crashing back down to the ground. After what I had witnessed with the two strange creatures, I began to doubt if I had been taken to an alien planet. However, the further I went, the more I found strange, seemingly challenging things. At first, it was just a bunch of stuff that looked like junk. Old kitchen cabinets and computers from the early 90s, just sitting in a small gap. There was also a 10-meter-tall statue of a soldier holding a sword and shield. The words engraved on it were written in an alphabet I had never seen before. By far the strangest was when I happened to see a large building standing desolate in the middle of the forest. It looked like an ancient bathhouse from Rome or Greece, with large, intricately carved pillars, vaulted ceilings, and panels of ripped carpet hanging silently. After debating for a while, I decided to wander inside, hoping the two creatures from before were far away. With a little luck, I thought I might find someone who could help me. This place looked abandoned. There were large pools containing water that looked relatively clean. My dry lips and severe headache reminded me of my dehydration. It was an adventurous idea, but I took the risk and took a few big gulps. It tasted weird, but it worked wonders in reducing my water loss. When I satisfied one need, another arose in my stomach: hunger. There were some parts of the building that really didn't make sense. Some trees stood inside the building itself, with the construction stopped right at their trunks. It looked like the building was built around them perfectly or merged with them somehow. The walls were covered with all kinds of handwritten graffiti. Many of them used standard alphabetic characters, but nothing seemed to be written in English. The writing appeared hurried and in different handwriting styles, as if many people had contributed over time. The only phrase I recognized was one that didn't really make me feel better. It was French, and thanks to 3 years of high school, I could decode the meaning of "L'amour n'habite pas ici." Love does not live here. They were definitely right about that. There was also a second floor to the building, but there seemed to be no direct way to approach it. It was strange because there was clearly a part where two sets of opposite spiral staircases should have fit perfectly, but they simply weren't there. I was getting desperate at that time and decided to make a questionable decision. "Hello!" My voice echoed through the courtyard. The house was deserted. There was no answer to my call. All around me was just an empty building that people had apparently long since left. The world seemed to be doing everything possible to challenge any explanation I could think of. It's like fragments of the earth from different points and times of reality, all awkwardly pinned together. Dinosaurs, weird cat things, those tall, blind, squid-shaped humanoid creatures, and the deadly sleep-inducing fog. There seemed to be no connection between them. Maybe they are all lost in a sinful way. After going through the bathhouse, I saw the room open into a wide chamber. There were slots in the walls, coffin-holding chambers resembling the Paris catacombs, but much more organized and meticulous. It seemed as if it was some kind of mausoleum. Again, why someone chose to build a bathhouse in the same building as a cemetery was beyond me. My stomach churned at a terrible answer. Perhaps the pools I drank from previously were not intended for the living. There was a large set of doors at the opposite end of the room. They were at least 15 feet tall and decorated with all kinds of runes and hieroglyphic images of unknown languages. Even now, more than a decade later, I haven't found anything like those symbols. It felt like the doors wouldn't budge an inch, and I wondered if I should try to open them. Just when I was about to give up, I felt the doors crack and start to move. It was like pushing a dead car. I actually had to bend down to open it wide enough to look inside. The crack widened and my heart pounded in my chest. I recoiled reflexively. At that time, they opened wide enough for momentum to carry them the rest of the way. I looked as the giant double doors opened wide to reveal a surprising sight inside. In the center of the room, illuminated by a single beam of light shining down from the roof, was a giant statue carved from jet black stone. It was at least 10 feet high. The doors and roof above it extended up in a decorative spiral formation dozens of feet more. In the center, the green light shone brightly from the sky. Staring up, the patterns were almost hypnotic, and I had to avoid looking. The statue was worth seeing, but it was on a completely different level. It had the shape of a human, but with some notable differences. Most obvious were the forearms and the fact that it was headless. 2 of the arms were opened wide, as if beckoning me towards it. The other 2 arms were crossed at the chest, with one index finger pointing up and the other pointing down. The statue was nude, neither male nor female. Around its neck was a necklace carved from the same stone, carrying an emerald pendant that glowed with a sparkling light. The base of the statue also had strange symbols engraved on it, sparkling similarly to the gem. The neck seemed slightly cracked, but after looking around, I couldn't find the lost head. The more I stared at it, the more worried I became. There seemed to be nothing else there. So after looking around a bit more, I went back the way I came. At all times, I was on guard for someone or something to ambush me, but it just never happened. Before I knew it, I was back at the front, looking for an alternative route, and not long after, I found one. There was a small path leading past the bathhouse and deeper into the woods beyond. It was shady and seemed rarely used, but because it was the first real road I had seen since being there, I considered it a signal to follow. Everything was quiet again as I walked, but every now and then I stumbled upon something worrying. I heard the trees rustling and looked up to see a horrible sight. Many human and animal figures were wrapped in a net-like thread, hanging high on the trees. It took me a while to understand what I was looking at, but once I understood, I felt a sense of panic. Then it got worse when a big shadow suddenly moved in the tree above them. I didn't wait to see more and ran away. The further away, the better. I don't know what it was in the tree, but I didn't intend to stay and find out. After a few minutes of running, I finally broke through the woods. I found myself with a wide field of sand open before me, a vast desert that seemed to stretch for miles. It was a distinct change, from a thick, dark forest suddenly to a wide open desert. It seemed somehow out of place. This was clearly not a normal place or situation. The red sand was rough and looked as fine as powdered sugar. It made it difficult to walk in, but I really had no other choice. I moved forward and found myself at the edge of a depression in the ground. Below was a vast field filled with all kinds of crushed rubble. There were a lot of devices that seemed abandoned to nature. From afar, I saw what looked like an old wooden wagon wheel, a few overturned carriages, and even a ruined cannon standing on the sand. A strange red mist seemed to lightly cover the area, like a curtain of evaporating blood. Over the terrain, I once again met eyes with the tower in the distance. At least it was a little closer. The pile of junk was much broader than I imagined. The horse-drawn carriages were overturned, but there were other vehicles as well. I found some old military jeeps from the 50s, a Roman chariot, a rusting Cadillac, several downed planes, and even an old Abrams tank. It was a mystical mixture of devices and equipment from all different times and locations. That discovery seemed to contradict my thoughts of being on an alien planet. The presence of Earth-based vehicles made it seem like a parallel universe or some alternate timeline. I didn't know if such things existed, but that was the only explanation I could think of. There were a few vehicles there unlike anything I'd ever seen. One in particular looked like a Blade Runner-style spinner, some future concept car. The sign on the back was a logo I recognized as Rolls-Royce. I don't know how to explain that. Maybe time itself doesn't exist there as it does on Earth? Or maybe whoever owned the vehicle had broken time travel. There were also weapons, rifles, swords, spears, and all sorts of other things lay discarded. All the items seemed badly damaged. It looked like an abandoned war zone. But the strangest realization came in the form of a question that sent a chill down my spine. If the devices are here, where are all the owners? I decided it was best not to dwell on those questions and tried my best to maintain a view of the tower and continue. My efforts did not last long, and soon I saw it disappear behind the red mist. My vision was quickly reduced to only about 20 feet. Not long after, I started hearing ominous sounds from all around me, a single groan, strange clicking and squeaking sounds, barely heard but certainly present. Then a scene in front made me quickly duck behind a rock. My heart was pounding, and I tried to stay calm while praying that what I saw did not see me. Even now, I'm not sure if I really saw it, or if it was just a joke of my mind. All I really saw was a bunch of tentacles waving, and that was enough to drive me away. By the time I finally got the courage to look back, there was no trace of it. I breathed a sigh of relief. The fog finally began to disappear after a few more minutes of walking. Ahead I saw an open valley. Inside was what looked like an ancient, grand Mesoamerican village. Rows of adobe huts lined the increasingly wide corridor. The tents stood empty and folded up the canyon walls. As I got closer, I noticed the path and the entrances were too small for ordinary people. Anyone or anything that created them must have been relatively small. Basically, I gave up on explaining anything or how they got there because other problems took priority. I felt my stomach growl. The lack of food was really starting to sting. The valley road then began to tilt upwards, and soon I found myself higher than the houses I saw in the canyon walls. I kept my head spinning, remaining alert. I was getting close to the plateau when a loud bang suddenly echoed across the valley. It sounded like a giant bell ringing. Other sounds quickly followed, the sound of metal clashing, screams and foaming from all around me. Many points in the sand began to stir and things started to emerge from below. Red sand poured out, revealing a person underneath. However, it was not an ordinary person. It was covered from head to toe in a kind of gray slate armor. It almost seemed to blend directly into its flesh. It carried a long rusted sword in one hand and a small shield in the other. Its head was covered by a twisted and deformed helmet. For a half second, I wondered if it might be a friend, but that feeling didn't last. Its head turned towards me as I saw other people standing up behind it. A blank face looked back at me, and my heart sank. Another one staggered up behind it, looking even more twisted than the first. Its head was molded into a shape near like a diamond. Both of its arms were lost, replaced by long chains attached by star-shaped iron blocks. Before I could react, the one with the sword suddenly started to charge towards me. It had not taken more than 3 steps before a deafening explosion broke out through the canyon. I felt the air disturbance of something shooting past me and hitting the armored thing right in the neck. The thing's neck violently exploded, almost decapitating it. It fell to the ground with a thud, and I looked around to try and find my guardian angel. There was no indication of where the shot came from, and I didn't have time to find out. The chain-armed demon swung one of its chains. I saw it swing up and quickly bent back as I jumped out of the way. It hit the ground where I stood before, and I knew right now was a good time to run. I heard footsteps squeaking behind me as other sounds filled the air. On the plateau, I saw other things staggering from their resting places, other humanoid creatures with various weapon enhancements. I saw one had its hands replaced with daggers, another with a large rampart spear protruding from its sternum, and another whose head appeared to have been fused with a helmet. But the strangest, indeed, were 2 individuals who appeared to have been fused together. Some of them also started to chase me, but most ignored me completely. After a few minutes of running, I felt my lungs starting to burn. My stomach was throbbing and my muscles were getting weak, on the verge of collapse. As soon as I was about to give up, I felt my legs suddenly get stuck in the sand. The sudden stop almost broke my ankle and I stopped abruptly. The armored things were on my heels and I started to panic, trying desperately to get my trapped legs free. The sand then shifted underneath me and I felt them starting to sink, as if in a tornado. I couldn't do anything to escape, and in seconds a large hole opened up, making me plunge into the abyss below. It was all a mess in that moment, but I felt my shoulder hit hard as I rolled down. I soon hit the ground with a thump and looked up as my vision rotated. Blurry shapes rolled over the edge of the cave above, falling into the sand after me. I staggered to my feet, pain reverberating in my knee. Luckily, there was a dark passage there, and I walked towards it without hesitation. I heard the chasers shuffle behind, but before they could stand up, a large batch of rocks rolled down. The rocks rolled from the cave ceiling, and one by one, the 4 iron-armored demons were crushed. I rushed into the passage. I looked back and saw the chained-arm one crushed by a pile of rocks, filling the path into the tunnel. Everything finally settled down. I was alone in the dark. I fumbled around to find the flashlight in my pocket. The beam of light shone a bright path through the dark cave. The way I got in was completely blockaded by the collapse, and obviously digging myself out was not an option. To my surprise and relief, the tunnel I entered continued on. It seemed to go deeper down before moving to the right. I didn't hear anything, but the thought of going deeper made my spine shiver. Unfortunately, I really had no other choice. That tunnel quickly branched into a maze of nooks and crannies of all sizes. Every few yards, I dropped a piece of the gum I pulled from my pack onto the ground. The flashlight flashed as it reflected off the tinfoil, which meant, in theory, I could use the path to find my way back if I got lost. The deeper I went, the more I started to think that the tunnel was not a natural formation. There were grooves cut into the passage, almost like something deliberately dug it out. After a few minutes, I entered an open chamber, and several other twisting paths were carved all around me. I tried to feel for a wind, but there was nothing. I ended up just choosing a new tunnel at random. I pulled the last piece of gum from my package and dropped it at the entrance. As I did so, I noticed something printed in the ground. Checking it out in more detail, I saw what looked like the footprints of a hiker. Some other signs were engraved in the ground on the other side, leading deeper into one of the tunnels. I followed them, and as I rounded the next corner, I saw what created them. In front of me, my flashlight shined on the outline of a man leaning against the wall. I froze, wondering if I could believe what my eyes were telling me. Then I thought he surely must have noticed me too, so there was no point in trying to hide. "Hello? Brother? Can you hear me?" The person did not react, and I felt a wave of paralyzing fear roll through me. I slowly crawled closer just to see the person's chest was not moving. Then I saw that pieces of something that looked like bone were stabbed into several points on his body. I gasped, holding back vomit when I realized he was dead, and may have been dead for a long time. He wore camouflage shorts, hiking boots, and a Def Leppard t-shirt. His eyes were wide and his mouth was open, lifeless. Although the scene was gruesome, it was encouraging for one simple reason. He was from my world, the real world. There was a small notebook on his lap. I crept closer and grabbed it, still paranoid the whole thing was some kind of trap. He did not move, and I took a step back to check it. There were sketches of animals and different landscapes inside, all at various stages of completion. He was quite good. One of his drawings was of a long-necked dinosaur, and it made me wonder if he saw one somewhere there. On the last page, I saw what he wrote. "My name is William James Gardner. In 1989, I was hiking in northern Tennessee with a few friends. I suddenly had a seizure or stroke of some kind. The next thing I know, I woke up in here, wherever here is. I don't even know what this place is, how I ended up here, or even how long I've been here. I thought I was dead for the longest time, but I don't think that's the case anymore. I will die soon, really dead. My ankle is broken and I'm losing blood. I don't have much time left. If you are reading this, I want to say thank you for finding it, but I'm sorry you did. I don't know who you are, but I think you are as confused and lost as I am. I wish I could say what this place is or how exactly to get out, but I'm afraid I have no clue. I have seen things here that I never thought possible. Humans, animals, crazy dragons and monsters. I know one thing. This place is not Earth. Hell, it's probably not even in the same universe. There is no large presence of people here, but I saw a few others. No city or community nor government of any kind, at least not that I can find. It's just empty and void. Hope. It is a world that seems to have no meaning. And maybe that's the point. Maybe this place is a dimensional problem that things just randomly fall into. Or maybe something is carrying them here on purpose. I really don't know. But every time I see that damn green ring in the sky, I can't help but feel like it is something more than a star. To my friends and family, if somehow you are reading this, just know how sorry I am. It kills me that I will never be able to see you again, but just know that I have fought to the end. Honestly, I hope no one ever finds this diary because I hope no one ever finds themselves in this place again. I guess you can consider this my last will. I love you guys, and I'm really sorry for not being strong enough to escape. Whoever you are who found this, please take this diary and anything else you need from my bag. I wish I could give you more help or advice, but I probably know a little less than you. If you return, please find my family and give this to them. Good luck, dear stranger. Be careful where you are. You are not alone down here. William. I felt my eyes start to tear up when I finished reading. The thought of him, alone and confused, slowly waiting for death, was agonizing to think about. How scared he and his family must have been. However, the most frightening realization was how similar our situations were, and that I was on the verge of the same fate. In addition to the heartaches, some parts of his will stood out. He mentioned that he had disappeared in 1989, nearly 20 years before I disappeared. However, his body looked no more than a week old. That gave two possible explanations, and neither was good. Or he was there surviving for nearly 2 decades, or for some reason his body just wouldn't decompose. Also, he mentioned he was hiking in Tennessee, yet somehow we were both transported to the same location. So either the phenomenon responsible has changed locations in 20 years, or it is large enough to affect both of us hundreds of miles apart. He also seemed as confused about being there as I was, and his theory made me think again. Is it possible we just happened to fall into some space-time dimension? His final words sent another wave of anger up my spine. You are not alone down here. William's backpack contained a handful of coins, which would help me continue to mark my trail. He also had an empty jar, some matches, and spare pencils, but most importantly, a flashlight that had a little remaining battery. That was especially appreciated, as my light was running dangerously low. I decided I might as well take the whole bag. Before leaving, I said a short prayer over William's body and half-heartedly continued deeper into the tunnel. I didn't know how long I was hiding in those deserted caves, but it must have been hours, long enough to drain the flashlight battery. It started to flash, and soon the world turned dark again. I felt a new level of fear, alone in the dark, a stranger in a strange land. Then it got worse. I took my socks off my feet and wrapped them around a bundle of William's pencils, tied thick wire around it to secure it, and dipped a little alcohol from the bottle into it. As I was assembling my slum torch, I heard something slither in the distance. With new urgency, I finished the job and lit a match. The flame on the torch caught bright, bathing the cave in orange. A flash of relief washed over me, but it was quickly extinguished when a shrill scream pierced the air. I turned around but could only see dust. I didn't need to see it. I heard the terrible sounds begin stirring and murmuring from all around me, and I lost all my cool. I started running, barely able to see where I was going. The unseen things began to howl and giggle from the shadows, but I just kept going. Ahead of me, I finally detected green light filtering in from a distance, further down the aisle. I ran towards it as the underground dwellers followed closely. I approached the corner, but stopped when a creepy howl rang out from the side. It shook the bones in my body. The sounds behind me were also getting closer, and there was nowhere else to go. I rounded the next corner. Suddenly, I had to skid to a stop as the edge of the rock suddenly cut off in front of me. I found myself on the shore of a great abyss. The ground just ruptured, leaving an open chasm before me. Some rocks rolled over the cliff as I stopped. I watched them roll down into the darkness below, but there was no sound of any impact. It didn't make sense. There was nothing down there. "Niren!" a voice suddenly shouted at me in an unknown foreign language. I looked around but saw no one. "Niren!" The voice was getting clearer. I waited but still saw no one. The voice then joined in, and soon a chorus of happy voices, begging in a strange language, filled the air. Finally, I looked across the abyss, and there, on the other side of the cliff, I saw something I could hardly believe. Embedded into the cliff walls were faces, dozens of faces, people and others. It looked like someone just took them and buried them up to their necks in the cliff face. Many of them opened their eyes and started screaming, but I couldn't understand whatever they were saying. There must have been hundreds of them. Suddenly, something yelled and hit me from behind. The impact almost knocked me over the rock wall and into the abyss, but I managed to steady myself with just a few inches to spare. Something was on my back, scratching and tearing my clothes and flesh. I fought and backed away from the cliff, hitting my back against the stone wall. The thing on my back jumped down and fell between my legs, biting and kicking my leg. It was fast. It looked like a dog-sized cricket. We fell to the ground fighting, and I managed to grab that thing and use my foot to kick it over the edge. I heard it screaming as it plunged into the abyss, but the sounds of other crickets echoed from the tunnel behind me. The wall of faces wailed in their choir, and I ran along the edge. The running didn't last long, because the edge was only a few inches wide, and I was forced to slow down to avoid falling. The faces continued to cry, and I saw many crickets appear from the tunnel behind me. Below, I heard something start stirring in the abyss. I just kept going, but only 30 seconds later, my worst fear was realized. An abrupt, dead end on the edge. No more room to run. Behind me, the crowd of crickets was pounding, and I felt the vibrations of something huge starting to pound into the rock below me. I thought I was done, and honestly considered jumping into the abyss, better than being ripped apart by the mob of insects. Even though the situation seemed hopeless, something inside me refused to give up. I turned, determined to face the crowd. I prepared myself as I looked at the dozens of them coming closer, but I had no fighting chance. Then something made of glass smashed down on the ground between us, bursting into a fire. The screaming crickets ran away. I turned to look up, but before I could, I saw a string come undone behind me. Someone was up there on top of the cliff wearing a gas mask with bright blue lenses. He shouted down just one word to me: "Climb!" He didn't have to say it twice. I rushed towards the rope and moved up as fast as possible. An ominous screech then came out from below, and I turned around to see a giant abomination moving up the cliff behind me. Multiple pliers on a thorax of serrated spines carried by dozens of legs. The most worrying thing about it was the face, which appeared too human. A sudden explosion echoed through the valley, hitting the horror centipede climbing the cliff. It screeched as part of its body exploded with a steaming burst of sticky green mist. The impact of the shot temporarily made it stumble, and it proved to be the opportunity I needed. As I neared the top, my rescuer reached out and grabbed my arm. In one swift motion, he basically picked me up and threw me up onto the cliff beside him. Then he fired another shot, which was answered back with a scream of pain and cut the rope behind me. The man wore a type of mottled leather armor with countless tattoos on his chest and shoulders. He wore some kind of face mask device. When he seemed sure those beasts couldn't follow us, He turned from the edge and aimed his rifle towards me. "Who are you?" he roared. I raised my hands, trying to convey I had no ill will. "David, my name's David." The man leaned his head slightly to one side. "You came here like that, David." I tried to answer, but I didn't even know where to start. I don't know. I was just walking in the forest in Colorado, and then it was like a seizure or something. I just woke up here. The man then reached into his bag and threw a small, shiny object that landed at my feet. "Look at it." I looked at him in confusion. "Why?" The man tightened his grip on the gun. "I need to know you're not one of them." He jerked the rifle toward the small reflective object. I didn't understand what he meant, but I also didn't want to test his patience. I stared at the small mirror-like surface and saw my reflection. My face was covered with dust and dirt, small cuts, and deep bags had formed under my eyes. The man then sighed. I looked up to see him lower his gun. Poor thing. The man put his rifle down and just stared at me. I wanted to ask who he was, but another question was more urgent as another shout rang out. "What are those things?" The man turned and looked over the ledge, then after a second came back. I call the small ones cave crickets, but that big thing, that's the first time I've seen it. He's one ugly fella. He said the words with a light southern accent. "What about those faces?" The man just stared outside a moment before finally turning back to face me. "It's best not to think about that right now." "Where are we? What is this place?" The man sighed and looked up at the green celestial sphere. Then I realized it looked different than before. More than half of the circle had faded away, leaving it in the shape of a rough crescent moon. "That's the million-dollar question, my friend." He looked back at me. "That's what I came here to find out." I sat up in the dust, and the man came and sat on a rock. "Who are you? How long have you been here?" The man then chuckled gently. "At least 60 cycles already, but I stopped counting. There's no real way to tell time here, except for that." He snapped his thumbs up in the direction of the green circle, but it doesn't always stay the same. "But as for who I am..." He then lifted his arm up and removed his mask. He was a white man, probably in his late 30s, with a thick black mustache and a shaved head. "Imperator Michael Torrance. Call me Michael." He leaned towards me and offered his hand. I met him and shook it. The relief of just feeling another person's hand in that moment was indescribable. I thought I would never meet another sane person. He made an impression that looked military to me, but his self-proclaimed title was one I didn't recognize. Imperator. Sounds like a military rank. That's because it is. I'm not military, at least not anymore. His eyebrows then frowned as if he were second-guessing himself. "Well, I guess I still am, but it's hard to explain." My mind seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, but then those extraordinary screams echoed again. They were different this time and didn't come from the valley below. Suddenly something giant flew into the sky in the distance. It looked like a giant snake with many wings and arms. I ducked behind a rock, and Michael laughed. "Relax, don't worry, it won't see you from so far away." "What is it?" Michael shrugged. "Damned if I know. Some kind of dragon ass. But you don't want to go near it. Found that out the hard way." He rolled up his pants, revealing a patch of scarred flesh extending from his leg to his thigh. "Oops," I replied. "Yeah, its eyes. They literally breathed fire." "It didn't spit fire," he giggled, covering his scar. "It spat some kind of acid. Hard to bear." "And I thought the dinosaur I saw earlier was bad," I said. Michael's eyes then fired a probe at me. "Which one?" he asked. My expression then mirrored his. "You mean there's more than one?" Michael sniffed and raised his eyebrows as if to say, "Oh yeah, you have no idea." "It looked like... I don't know. And it escaped." "He escaped?" he asked, his surprise even stronger. I just nodded shyly. I dove into a swamp." Michael just looked back at me, confused for a moment, before he burst out laughing. After a second, I laughed too, and the relief was immense. Even with all the monsters and demons in that cursed place, the worst part about it was the isolation. It felt really good to connect with another living human being. "I'm sure there is at least some courage," he said. How many bells have you heard?" I didn't understand his question at first, but then I remembered the sound when I was in the Red Mist Valley. "Just one." Michael's eyes then widened. "Damn, you really are new here." Again, I just nodded back. Michael then turned and pointed to the sky. "You see that thing up there?" I nodded. "It is God here. It's the only sign that there is any order to this place. When that green fades out of sight, the bell will ring again. Once it does, everything locks up and you'll be stuck here forever until the next one." He put his hand down and seemed to be pondering something dark. I didn't even know what to say. His eyes seemed to be glittering with a kind of sad desolation. I think he was stuck there a long time ago. "How do we escape?" I asked. But part of me already knew the answer. Sure enough, he nodded his head up at the tower rising just a few hundred yards away. "That's our ticket home." I stared up at it clearer than ever. The architecture, cogs, and spiral hieroglyphics looked much scarier than before. I don't think that's man-made. We and I just sat and talked for a while, and he offered me some food he had. Just some strange bitter orange berries, but they were appreciated. We talked about everything, where we came from and what we did. As I suspected, he confirmed he was part of some secret government organization. Black Ops, classified top secret. He said that the organization he was part of had no allegiance to any single country or government. Their focus was on humanity and the planet in general. And sometimes that means standing on opposite sides depending on the situation. He said that he and the people he worked with tried to get access to that place for a very long time. Michael managed to get in, but admitted he hadn't seen any other members of his group since he'd been there. He then said that the cycles he mentioned earlier were the measurement of the green circle fading. Apparently at some point the circle will go completely dark before a full reset shortly after. He also hinted that something very bad happens at that time, but that it was also a moment of opportunity. He said the time between these cycles seemed to change drastically, but he had no way to prove that without external references. He said the first one he measured lasted 29 days, with the next one lasting 113. His watch battery died partway through the third cycle, so he couldn't follow it anymore. Then he told me really strange things about this place itself. He figured that time operates differently there, but he didn't understand exactly how. There is no day or night or season, just a perpetual twilight illuminated by the green circle. He also said nothing rots there, and the corpses do not decompose. He even has a name for the nightmare world. He calls it the Intermediate. At first, that name didn't make much sense, but the more he explained, the more I started to see why. He told me a lot about it, and at some point, I don't think I still believed him. Not that I thought he was lying, just the story he told was too fussy, too strange, too freakish. The truth is always stranger than fiction. I will save most of the information he provided from my last entry, because I believe it is more suitable for the conclusion. For now, let's just say he told me what he thinks is responsible for me ending up there. "So why? Why me?" I asked. Michael met my eyes but looked confused. "Why was I taken away?" I demanded. The truth is, I was desperate for any solution at the time. He probably could have told me it was a secret plot between Taco Bell and Bugs Bunny, and I would have believed. "It just happens," he said. "Some people get taken away, while others do not." He seemed to silently admit failure, but then answered my question with a question of his own. "Do you believe in the supernatural?" I just looked at him, as if there was any way I couldn't believe, after what I had seen. He chuckled. "Oh, I didn't. Not until I woke up here. Thought science could finally explain everything. And maybe one day it will, but I'm slightly suspicious. However, what's interesting is that the Arapaho tribe once had a legend that I now think has everything to do with these things. They call it the danger of silence. Their superstition is that isolated and lonely areas move in ways we can't explain. They use the word soul, but I think it's even more complicated. They would always travel in groups of at least 2 people, no matter what they were doing. Have to go to the bathroom? One of his Arapaho friends must come squat beside him. They say it's dangerous to be alone in the forest, even for just a single moment. What does that mean? I asked. Michael shrugged. The way they talk about it, it's like it was just a natural force, like wind or rain. It just is. But there's an explanation for wind and rain, so there must be an explanation for this. He didn't seem to have the answer to that. Once again, the tower rising high on the cliff caught my eye. Michael pondered the question for a good minute, and finally he just grabbed his gun and stood up. When we get out of here, I'll tell you everything I know. We had something else to worry about, because if what Michael affirmed was true, then we were running out of time. He and I began to walk in silence along the edge of the chasm. The narrow road quickly turned from an uneven slope into rocky mounds we had to climb over. Finally, we climbed over one last edge and found ourselves on a small plateau. The tower grew larger than ever, only about 300 yards away. Michael shouldered his rifle onto a rock and climbed up. "How do you know there's a way out?" I asked. Michael dusted himself off and glanced at the tower. "I don't, but there is a small percentage of people who return. I think when a cycle ends, it gives an opportunity to escape. And as you can see, we don't have a lot of time left." He pointed to the circle in the sky again, and I saw its light had faded more, leaving only about 1/4 of its initial size. If I were to place a gateway, it would be there. He nodded towards the tower. He carefully climbed up a rock standing in the center of the road. He said, "Sometimes other things get out of here too." He held out his hand, and I grabbed it as he pulled me up beside him. "Other things? What things?" Michael spit and turned back to the road as he let out a laugh. "Things you are better off not knowing." I followed behind him. "Have you been inside yet?" I asked. "No, been trying to get to it since I got here," he replied without looking back. The road expanded onto a small plateau and curved further to the side, becoming a winding road that seemed to lead straight to the foot of the giant tower. The spongy ground seemed to resonate as I walked, as if it was hollow underneath. We rounded the small rocky area and Michael suddenly stopped. He held out his hand and I joined him, seeing exactly why he stopped. Dozens of gray shapes lay scattered about the vicinity. Michael didn't move. Lucky for us, they also did not move, and I realized they were all just sculptures. There were dozens of them, all frozen in different positions. Some stood completely upright, standing with arms covering their faces. Others lay on the ground, as if solidified in death. Most of them looked like they were engraved in a state of torment. That discovery made me wonder if they were more than just art. The expressions engraved on their slate faces conveyed terror, sadness, and something like mania. Mostly human, but also animals and other unidentified species. There was even one like a large stegosaurus. "So, should we keep an eye out for Medusa?" I was mostly joking, but Michael didn't respond. He just walked forward in silence and knelt by one of the bodies on the ground. It looked like a young girl wearing an old-style dress, something seen in the early 1900s. "I know her." I turned back to stare at him, agape. "What?" "Her name is Natasha. She's French. Didn't speak much English, but she was with me for a moment. She just disappeared suddenly, and I never found her." Michael then bowed his head, as if attacked by the weight of his apparent failure. After a few seconds, Michael raised his head. "We just keep moving. We're running out of time." And so we did. Michael started filtering through the fields of frozen shapes, and I silently followed. It was way beyond creepy. All the people and creatures frozen hard in time like Han Solo and Carbonite. What power could have done that? I don't know, but it was pretty obvious that we were going straight towards it. So I had to ask, that green circle, is it a star or something? Michael pondered as we approached the steep terrain. Not possible. He didn't turn back when speaking. We approached the area where the road bridged to the tower, starting when he finally stopped and turned back. I saw his eyes scan the terrifying scene around us, and he sighed deeply. Even after all this time here, I still can't explain half the things I saw. Then he turned around and continued walking, and I followed again. The two of us climbed up on the rock and stood staring at the horizon. From that vantage point, I could see further than ever. A long desolation stretched over the land until it touched a fence of soaring high mountains. I saw shapes moving in the distance, but they were too far and many to determine. Then I noticed Michael was staring at the circle. "You know what's fun?" he asked. "If you avoid the light as it fades, it almost looks like an eye." Needless to say, that feeling did nothing to quell my wild imagination. Michael then just laughed and skipped to the next part. I guess sometimes all you can really do is laugh. We continued up the winding road, and from the start of our journey up the slope to the entrance of the tower, Michael pointed out a large arch in the foot, and we both speculated that it must be the entrance. Before long, we were actually crawling on all fours as the slope became steeper with each step. Michael signaled me to go ahead. After all, he weighed much more than me, and since he had a gun, I thought he might be watching my back if anything tried to chase us. I have never been much of a climber, but that moment really pushed my ability to the absolute limit. Right at its peak, I found myself pressing out with both arms and legs against parallel stone walls. I felt my muscles start to twitch with every small step, but somehow I managed to reach the next edge. Once through, I collapsed to the ground, gasping. "Are you okay up there, David?" Michael called. It took me a moment to catch my breath before calling back down. "Yeah, I'm fine. There's a short break here." After looking up at the last obstacle, I realized the hardest part was still to come. The only way I could see to proceed was to jump up and grab the edge above me. If I missed, or if I couldn't hold on, I would fall hundreds of feet down. Below me, the empty abyss towered menacingly. "You reach it?" A sudden, huge smack against the earth echoed along the cleft cliff, cutting Michael mid-sentence. I jumped up and scanned the horizon but saw nothing. "What is it?" I asked, looking down at Michael. "It's getting closer." Michael dropped his pack and started to swing wildly through. "Michael, what is that?" I screamed. As soon as the question left my lips, I saw something absolutely huge move behind him. Michael pulled something from his backpack. I looked up with great hope. "Listen to me," Michael shouted. "Get inside and make your way to the top. That will take you home." Michael loaded a new magazine into his gun and stared up at me. Boom! The hill itself seemed to move behind him. "What? No, come with me!" I screamed. Michael shook his head. "We'll never make it in time." Then he looked at the small silver box in his hand. Boom! "Take this!" He threw a small steel lockbox up and I caught it. "And this!" He threw another object before I was even ready, but somehow I managed to catch the pistol. Boom! Something then giant began to rise over the edge. "What about you?" I asked. Michael shook his head. "No time! Just take yourself home!" He muttered something to himself and smiled, but I couldn't hear what it was. He and I locked eyes when another boom rang out. Then I saw something protruding dozens of meters above us, looking like a giant slab of moving concrete, the same color as the frozen statues on the edge. Its head was round and lined with large green spheres glowing like the circle in the sky. The giant golem turned its head towards us, and Michael seemed to have accepted the inevitable. He loaded the main gun. "I get it. Nice to meet you, David. My regards to everyone at home," he said with a slight smile. But I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I wanted to argue, but had no chance. Michael turned around and suddenly rushed towards the giant. He opened fire, a series of bullets hitting the giant golem in the head. It roared with the intensity of a dozen jet engines, and I turned away to do what I had to do. There was nothing I could do for him. I had to go. The sound of bullets and thunderous bombs echoed behind me as pieces of memories began to fly through my mind with the raging of a storm. It seemed like every moment of my life combined into a single moment. I said a quick prayer and I jumped. My hand slapped across the edge, but the smooth stone made holding impossible. I panicked as my hands and body started to slide back off the edge. I was about to lose it all when my right hand managed to hold on to a cavity in the rock. I squeezed, using every ounce of strength to avoid falling to my own destruction. My legs dangled hopelessly, and I held on by my left arm. The flashlight rolled out of my pocket, and I turned back to see it plunge into the abyss. A nihilistic part of my mind screamed to just let go, to surrender and rest. I was so exhausted. But something inside me wouldn't let me give up. It took every muscle, but somehow I did it. I pulled myself over the edge and collapsed in the dust. I felt my mind glimmering on the brink, but then I saw Michael. He just stood there, rifle hanging at his legs, as he looked at the giant in front of him. That thing made a final roar, and Michael didn't even startle. From the central green sphere on its face, a beam of light appeared and shone down on him. I heard him gasp and moan as his body seemed to jerk and stiffen, as if attacked by a sudden spasm. He cried out and his body became a statue, like those other people. His skin patches became discolored, turning gray, spreading like a slow rolling wave along his skin. Suddenly all those other people made sense. In a moment, Michael looked just like them, gray and frozen forever. I was temporarily bewitched by the blasphemous death of my only friend, and I didn't see the golem turn towards me. I looked up in time to see it raise its hands. I jumped up and ran towards the entrance into the tower, but I was too late. All I really remember is a final boom as everything exploded and blurred to black around me. I woke up, confused and with a pounding head. I felt dust and the sticky residue of blood on my forehead. It was dark, but small rays of light were coming through cracks somewhere above. It only took a second to realize I couldn't move, and one more second to realize why. Rockfall and rubble had pinned me to the ground. My memory came back and my vision stabilized. I tried to fight, but my leg was pinned under. My right arm was free, but my left arm was pinned behind me. It was all I could do to stop myself from completely succumbing to the escalating panic as I tried to think of a way out. There was a small hole in front that looked just wide enough to squeeze through. I kicked my legs and tried to twist. After a few minutes of the same movement, I felt the rubble finally move. I pushed and turned, flipping onto my chest, but at the cost of the weight falling on my feet. After a time stretching, pulling, and twisting, I finally managed to wiggle my way out of the pile. When I did, the whole pile moved and rumbled, causing a loud noise behind me. I took my chance and rushed to its side. Crawling quickly on my belly in what was essentially a tunnel as wide as a sewer pipe, there was barely enough room to move, but I pulled myself forward. Finally, I managed to stretch my right arm out, breaking through the edge of the pile into freedom. With one last tug, I pulled myself through the hole and out from under the collapsed entrance. I fell to my knees in relief, finally free from my temporary grave. In the desperate fight, I had almost forgotten where I was. The room was in the state of carnage, with columns fallen and damage to the walls. It could all be the result of a punch from that stone giant. But to me, the damage appeared to have preceded the crash. There was a narrow corridor in front of me, and it seemed to be the only way forward. The walls had strange dents, and it reminded me of the grooves created by scales. The architecture was really weird, unlike anything I had ever seen before. Fortunately, most of the equipment I had before the crash was still present. The only thing that was lost was perhaps the most important thing I had: Michael's pistol. I tried to dig around in the ruins once more, But deep down, I knew there was no hope of recovering it. I would have to continue with just my intelligence to protect me. So I started going in the only direction I could, hoping that everything I had been through would be worth the price, and especially to honor Michael's selfless sacrifice. I still don't know why he so quickly did what he did, but for him, I had a duty to continue. Soon, I came to an open chamber with several doors lining the walls. Once again, the room was littered with broken pieces, but also something more interesting. Many dead bodies lay scattered around the room, but none of them were human. 4 of them were dressed in uniforms, shiny silver suits, narrow heads, and long limbs. One of their masks had cracked open, allowing me to see strangely bulging black eyes staring out. Their bodies were human-like with 2 arms and legs, but that's where the comparison stopped. They looked more like fish than anything else. Their hands were little tentacles, not fingers, and they seemed to have strange fins on their backs. I'm sure I could learn more about what they were if I bothered trying to remove one of their outfits, but I was too stressed to try. From their various wounds, it was obvious they all died in some physical conflict, and at the far end of the room I found the likely offender, a large armor-like creature fallen in the far right corner. It had multiple limbs with large pliers for forearms. Its head looked like a weird mix between an alligator and a lobster. That thing must have stood at least 8 feet tall, but lucky for me, it looked like the others, having died long ago. With what Michael told me earlier about nothing there decomposing, I realized they all could have been lying there undisturbed for centuries. I had no way to know for sure, but clearly both species were unlike anything ever seen on Earth. Were they aliens? I went through the passage, which opened directly across from where I had gone through, past the dead things, and deeper into what I hoped was the base of the tower. In that hallway there was another dead creature, but it didn't seem like any of the other 2. This one sat against the wall with a hood covering its face, and the way it was propped up made it look like it wasn't dead at all, but just resting. I moved cautiously, but it did not move as I got closer, and I realized it was much taller than me. Besides its height and elongated shape, it looked as human as possible. 5 fingers on the hand were covered by gloves, and the overall appearance was similar to a human, albeit much thinner. It was also holding something in its hands, a small globe with familiar green hieroglyphs on it. I thought about taking it, but ultimately decided to just move forward and not risk the possible consequences. Around the corner, I came to a new room with a large platform in the center. It seemed to be constructed from a metal similar in appearance to stainless steel. It was extremely decorative, with complex designs printed on it. It was another moment when I wished I had my phone with me. It would be useless for calls, no doubt, but a picture would do more justice than my words ever could. I looked up and realized I was in a giant open shaft. Hundreds of feet above me, I saw the opening at the top. The walls of the chamber were hexagonal and completely symmetrical in design, almost like that of a honeycomb from a hive. The room layout and the shaft's length made something clear. It was an elevator, one that had the ability to lead straight to the top. The design must be perfect. After returning to the previous room to look for alternative routes, I found no stairs or ladders. I was back in the shaft when that little orb in the hands of the dead humanoid creature caught my eye again. A crazy thought went through my head. This time I grabbed it from the thing's hand and searched my way back to the elevator room. Indeed, in the center of the platform, there was a small circular indentation, one that looked specially designed for the small orb. I carefully brought the orb to the slot, and as it approached, it suddenly snatched from my hand, like a sudden magnetic pull. The orb fell into the slot with a clang, and the hieroglyphs on it suddenly lit up brightly. Before I knew it, green light spread around the platform, hissing and clicking as the machine roared back to life. All around and above me, I saw the hexagonal slots begin to glow brightly as they lit up, one by one, in no particular order. Within seconds, the entire shaft was glowing like some super futuristic tunnel. In the strangest sense, it really was beautiful. I approached one of the glowing slots and marveled at the sight I caught a glimpse of inside. It was a live feed or recording adjacent to some dense forest with tall bioluminescent trees. The next scene turned into a big puffy creature climbing through the sky. It moved back, and I saw two-legged creatures rushing in a pack formation through a field of flowing red grass. It was impossible to believe, but it was nothing. I glanced at the other screens and saw glimpses of different unfamiliar scenes from places I didn't recognize. There were hundreds of them, allowing a glimpse of scenery outside this planet that perhaps human eyes had never seen before. Giant creatures swimming across vast oceans, flying birds flying over valleys of towering castles jutting out of the ground miles into the sky. Suddenly, my fear almost disappeared, replaced with the most wonderful sense of curiosity. Returning to the podium, I saw two hieroglyphs around the slot where the sphere fit. Both glowed green, but one was clearly brighter than the other. I clearly couldn't read the alien vocabulary, but to me it reminded me of an up-down switch. On that thought, I pressed my finger into the brighter hieroglyph. Nothing happened, and so I grabbed the orb and spun it in the slot. That seemed to work because the other hieroglyph then began to grow bright. The clicks and mechanical screeches that followed echoed through the room, and I felt myself dip down a little, as if being freed from some locking mechanism. The next thing I knew, my doubt proved correct, and the platform started to rise. I was treated to countless views from the hundreds of hexagonal gates as I flew up. I could spend 100 years watching them, and I still wouldn't come close to describing all the scenes I witnessed with the detail they were worthy of. The elevator moved quite slowly, but those endless views made me almost speechless. It must have taken a good 10 minutes before the elevator finally reached its destination at the top. The elevator stopped, and I stepped out onto a confusing scene. The first thing I saw was the vast, open landscape around me. I could see further than ever before and realized how big the land really was. In every direction I looked, I did not see the end of it. There were only different mountains, lakes, deserts, and forests of all shapes and sizes. There were also blocks of land that seemed to be missing, like the chasm from before, just dark and empty, as if the landscape itself was hung on a canvas, with gaps and cracks that had developed over time. In the distance, I even saw something I recognized. There was another tower, nearly identical to the one I was standing on. It must be more than 20 miles away, but the perception was not lost on me. There was more than one of these towers. My mind finally focused back on the neighborhood, and something on the surface of the land brought back the sense of wonder, which became fear. There was a giant creature lying there motionless. I say creature, but it's not like anything I had ever seen.
It was almost mechanical in appearance, with a body of flesh and glowing metal blended. Its head was slightly reptilian. It had 4 thin limbs that stretched out, with 2 hook blades on 2 hands and 2 swords on the others. It also had 3 smaller tentacle appendages protruding from the back. Luckily, it didn't move, and didn't seem to have done so for quite a long time. Around us, on the tower's roof perimeter, was a series of pods. I counted 7 of them, glowing dimly green with spheres and screens. Most appeared broken or in various states of damage, but one was standing completely intact, with one large mirror in the center. A sudden flash of green light, then fading, drew my attention to the sky. The green ring was now only faintly visible as darkness almost took it completely. Then it suddenly flickered, emitting a beam of green light down the tower like a laser beam. I bent down, but it was too fast. The light burned when it hit, like a 3rd-degree sunburn, boiling every square centimeter of my skin. I fell to my knees, screaming because of the pain. Even stronger than the pain was the anger, as I felt my journey had come to an end. as if all of my experience and seen was just so I could die on top of the tower. But just when I was sure I couldn't bear it any longer, it suddenly stopped. I slowly raised my head and felt steam rising from my body as small green orbs of light emitted from me. The small green orbs glowed the same color as the circle, and they all flew towards the mirror. One by one, they flew into the mirror and disappeared as I staggered to stand up. In the mirror, I saw the green orbs combine and blend into one expanding green block. It got bigger until it covered the entire surface of the mirror. Behind me, I heard the elevator click and watched it start to descend. I thought about jumping on it, but I knew I would never have escaped if I had backed off now. The mirror glowed green, then began to ripple and warp, looking like a green stone wall swaying in an earthquake. A second later, a hand slowly appeared from inside, like a flower blooming in spring. It was a human hand, and it was followed by a shoulder, a head, and then the whole body. I looked confused about what was happening as the person fell to his knees in front of me. Then I realized it was wearing exactly the same clothes as me. Then it raised its head, and I had to stop myself from collapsing from shock. It was me, a different me. The copy slowly stood up, more like a snake rising than a person regaining balance. It stared back at me with open and emotionless eyes. It looked exactly like me. I don't understand how it could be, but when the imposter staggered forward, I knew it wasn't here to make friends. Michael's words thundered in my head, and I drew the only weapon I had, the small pocket knife. The imposter didn't flinch and took another step towards me. "Back off!" I yelled, trying to steady my shaking hands as I pointed the knife at it. That thing just took one step further, looking at me with that same strange face. "Back off," it repeated. Its words echoed and somehow out of phase. I stepped back, and it came at me. It hit hard, and we both rolled to the ground. My knife pierced its sternum as we fell, and I felt it lying face down on me. I threw it off and quickly retreated. I thought it was dead, but it slowly stirred and turned towards me. It rose again, with the blade still stuck in its chest. It seemed undisturbed by it at all, and didn't even try to remove it. It lunged at me again, but it was clumsy and slow, as if it didn't know how to properly use my body. I stepped out of the way, and it fell clumsily into a heap. In a few seconds, it was back on its feet and ready to attack again. Something then rang out in my mind, one of the last things Michael told me. Things here lurk like humans. They don't like their reflection. I thought maybe that phrase meant exactly that, and quickly tried to find something I could use. There was nothing around, and I suddenly felt that thing stabbing me. I slid towards the now empty shaft, stopping right at the edge of the open trough. The imposter was above me, pinning my arms and feet, and looked down with that same disgusting, expressionless face. I fought, but the copy seemed to possess the exact same power as I had. I could not get released. "Back up again." That thing repeated my words, but this time it sounded indistinguishable from my voice. It's like it was learning from me, trying to imitate me as best as possible. I struggled back and heard a sound when something fell out of my pocket. It was Michael's lockbox, and it broke open to reveal the small mirror he instructed me to look in before. I managed to free my leg and kicked hard, directly into the chest of the imposter. It didn't seem to register the pain, but the kick threw it back and was enough for me to free my arm and reach for the mirror. It fought back, but I held the mirror up to it. The imposter froze, head tilted to one side as if confused. Then I saw its pupils contract before its head leaned back and it made a groan of terror. Then it released its grip and jumped away from me, banging its head and struggling like crazy, as if it suddenly went mad from its own reflection. Its skin began to twist and stretch to reveal gray scars underneath. Its camouflage was falling apart. While it was in chaos, I took the opportunity to line up my shot. I lunged at it and drove my shoulder into its chest. The imposter was knocked back, and I watched it lose balance and roll off the edge into the open shaft below. I heard the sound when it hit the bottom a moment later, and silence returned once again. The circle in the sky then began to shimmer and distort, as if angry. The green was now just barely visible, and in seconds it was completely gone. The world got darker, but only as dark as an early morning on Earth. The next moment is hard to describe. The dark patches that should be the sky seemed to move and circle. The green seemed to focus directly on me. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but I felt the gaze of a giant thing on me. A giant alien mind that easily dwarfed my mind 1,000 times, then revealed its terrifying presence. I was suddenly attacked by the sharpest sense of insignificance, as if the giant thing that existed around me was something far beyond my own capabilities, to the point where I was unable to hope to challenge it. At that time, I understood. The whole world was not just a floating land in a space dimension. It was not just a land of the lost. It was an entity. The land itself and the sky consisted of its immense mass, and the green ring that appeared was its window to view its territory. Michael was right. It was an eye. I was desperately overwhelmed, and even the very act of trying to decode what I was witnessing put stress on my mind. My head ached like never before, and I felt as if its contents were seeping from inside me. Visions and memories of my life revolved around me as if I was being exposed to the giant thing in the sky. I felt the howling depths of complete insanity crawl up my leg and start to tighten my head. I felt my mind begin to disintegrate and my soul drift out from inside. No words can describe that incredibly insignificant feeling. It's like the whole universe was spread out in front of me, and I understood how small I really was. As soon as I was sure my mind was about to be overwhelmed and consumed, things started to change. The visions faded, and soon everything else was the same. The feeling, undescribable, like before when I first awakened here, returned, but fiercer. I felt like I was being compressed into infinite non-existence, but it didn't last. I can't explain exactly what happened, but after that, I woke up. Air rushed into my lungs, and I gasped as I jumped up from the ground. A crimson sun bathed the view, and I heard the call of birds and the rustling of trees. I felt my skin wrinkle as a serene breeze rolled over my cheeks. I reached up and touched my face in disbelief. I had returned. I almost didn't want to believe it, as if it were some kind of psychic joke. But the light, the plants, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the warmth of the sun shining down on me. A sudden desperate hunger hit my stomach like a punch, and I felt weak. Tears filled my eyes, and I cried like never before in my life. The absolute relief of being released from that horrible place was pure, indescribable joy. The more I glanced around, the more I began to recognize the familiar rendezvous trail around me. The trees then rustled behind me, and I turned to see an old man step out of the forest. He was dressed as a hiker and had a walking stick. His eyes fell on me and popped wide, and the gray mustache on his upper lip curved around a gasp. "David Huff?" he asked. I could only nod between my tears. Then he hurried to my side, giving me his water bottle as he shouted that he had found me. Then I realized how hungry and thirsty I really was as I drank the water. In a few moments, there were dozens of other people around me. Many of them I recognized as experienced counselors. I saw my father and sister appear, and their hearts seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. They ran and hugged me tight, crying in a way I've never heard them cry before. They told me they were starting to think they would never see me again, and I thought so too. Before long, I was put on a stretcher and taken to a local hospital. It was there that I first learned that the situation was even weirder to them than it was to me. I had been missing for nearly 11 full days.
I woke up. The search had lasted less than half a dozen hours with a tracking dog team and more than 500 volunteers. The dogs followed my scent trail to the rendezvous road, up to the point where I was last, before it suddenly cut off. The dogs suddenly lost the track and they found no trace of my marks. None of them had any explanation for how this could be. And of course they turned to me for answers. I didn't even know what to say to them. I thought they would definitely send me to the psych ward. But that didn't stop me from trying. I told them everything I wrote here today. But I doubt many people believed me. I have done countless interviews with police, journalists, investigators, and even anonymous men in black. There were a few others who clearly had the same things happen to them, but I haven't talked to anyone among them. Of course, no one has any real explanation for what happened to me, but I know someone who did. According to what Michael Torrance told me and reports from many other strange disappearances, this phenomenon is not unique. It's not publicized, but it has been happening for a very long time. Michael said humans have been vanishing from remote, inaccessible areas for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The details of the cases are very strange, to say the least. Many share similar points, but also keep their unique edges. Sometimes the vulnerable disappear, a child or an elderly person. Other times it's the invaluable experts, animal trackers and survival experts. Sometimes they are found dozens of miles from where they were last seen. Sometimes only pieces are found, and sometimes nothing at all. The cases are widely diversified, but tend to share a few common points. Most of those reported missing were seen just seconds before and seemed to suddenly disappear, leaving no trace. The search party will usually be successful in finding the rest, belongings, but very many times those leftovers will be found in places that have been searched many times, as in my case. Search dogs seem unable to pick up the scent, and tracking experts cannot find any sign of the person leaving their last reported position. There was never any sound of a struggle, nor any smell left behind. Michael says there are thousands of these cases, with an unspecified number of others perhaps never known. The incidents seem to challenge all logical explanations, and those assigned to detect them are imperative to consider unconventional solutions. That's where Michael and his team appeared. He claims he is part of a secret task force consisting of specialist soldiers, trackers, outdoorsmen, and mercenaries. This special force, he left no reputation, no loyalty to any country or government. Their only real loyalty is with preserving humanity and planet Earth in general. And that means standing on different sides depending on the situation. I imagine it also means sacrifices occasionally for the greater good. He did not elaborate much on how they work, but he mentioned that he and his team investigated these specific disappearances. It turns out he got there in almost the same way I did. He was just walking through the woods when he was taken away and woke up in that place. The only real difference between our stories is that he deliberately tried to get there. Michael's statement was surprising, but my subsequent investigation has at least confirmed that these disappearances have occurred and continue to happen. There are organizations that investigate these cases, but they struggle to provide answers. I'm sure the government certainly investigates them, but there is no official record of that. Inside the box that Michael gave me, I found some meaningful items. One is a black and white photo of what seems to be a young Michael Torrance hugging a young woman. I think they were lovers or husband and wife, but the interesting thing is, on the back of the photo is the date, May 13th, 1952. As I mentioned earlier, Michael looked no older than his 30s when I met him, but for the sake of argument, let's say he was 40. Let's also assume what he told me about his government job is also the truth. He did not mention exactly when he entered that territory, but if he was a full soldier, he must have been at least in his mid-30s. In the photo, he looks like he just got out of high school, probably 20 at the latest, in the year 1952. That means he must have disappeared sometime between then and 1972, absolutely latest. That means he was wandering around there somewhere between 35 and 55 years. Apparently, he didn't appear near that age to me, because if he was 20 in 1952, he would be 75 in 2007, the year I disappeared. Remember that the numbers I use are basically him at his oldest, meaning he is most likely much older than my calculations suggest. Now, barring any advanced life preservation technology his employer holds, that means he ages differently inside that place. That seems appropriate with what he told me about time operating differently, and as well as how I myself was missing for almost 11 days, though it felt like maybe a dozen hours to me. Since this happened, I've been wondering how it's possible. Maybe that territory is orbiting a black hole and suffering from the effects of time dilation. That wouldn't explain how we got there, but it would explain the changes in aging, and maybe even the green circle. Maybe the land itself is an alternative reality with different rules, or maybe the truth is something far more interesting than that. Another thing Michael kept in his lockbox was a small diary, and in that I discovered some of the most interesting things he clearly learned in his time there. I don't know how he got the knowledge he writes about, but that is the best explanation I have for the question that has haunted me since this happened. What is the intermediate world? The intermediate world is Michael's name for that world, and his diary makes the insanity itself begin to make more sense. According to him, that world is not just an accident or isolated incident. It is a gateway. A long time ago, perhaps before the origin of humanity arose on Earth, there was a species that Michael called the pioneers. He didn't know where they came from, who they were, or what they even wanted, but he believed that they created the intermediate world as a way to pass between worlds. The vast archive of things I saw in the ascent of the tower elevator seemed to validate that theory in my mind. Michael discovered that the same tower that led me back is simply one of dozens littered around the land. He believes that each is a portal to hundreds of worlds, maybe even thousands. A galactic library of unimaginable proportions. It must have taken countless millennia to build something so elaborate. Despite his adventures, Michael could never find the pioneers. He believes that they have been extinct for a long time, but doesn't know why. He mentioned that it is his belief that what happened was not their intention, that they let something out without ever intending it to get out. Michael's diary reveals his belief that somewhere along the line of the Intermediate's construction, something got in that they never intended, an ancient entity that Michael said has the power to rival something we would consider a god. He said this dark god might be responsible for wiping them out, but he is not entirely sure. He also believes that this very thing is ultimately responsible for the phenomenon of humans disappearing in remote areas. He didn't know how or what to do to prevent it, but he provided my list of tips that I posted at the top of my first entry. He called this thing a vulgar imitation, a poor play on life, an entity that attempts to copy the organic part but can only come close. It can only reflect the same image but lacks what is needed to create authentic life. He calls it by many names: the great imposter, the odd man, but most importantly, from my perspective, the green light. I don't know how to take in that information, but when I consider how I had to fight a clone of myself on top of the tower, it suddenly started to make sense. Maybe it was a test or challenge I overcame, or maybe it was trying to replace me with that vulgar imitation out there. That awareness made me so nervous when I actually understood the reactions in what Michael was saying. Sometimes other things escape too. I can't help but think suspiciously about others who seem to have returned unharmed. What if they aren't the other people? What if they were replaced by an imposter? Not only that, but I realized the deep implications of the intermediate. How many different cultures and peoples all over the world have legends about monsters and cryptids? What if all these myths have the same origin? The intermediate world is most likely a portal, and there is no way to know exactly what can pass through. Bigfoot, aliens, ghosts, Mothman, Chupacabra, the Jersey Devil. It can explain any number of them. The practical implications are limitless. Although, everything I wrote here today, I always hope these memories are somehow just figments of my imagination, as if somehow there is a logical explanation for all this, or that I'm wrong, and despite how vivid these memories are, I hope it was all just a horrible nightmare, or a coma, or maybe I was kidnapped by aliens and force-fed space LSD as part of an Illuminati secret plan to fake the moon landing and make the Earth flat. Anything that sounds more reasonable than the truth. For nearly a decade, I have been trying to convince myself that none of this ever happened. I have exhausted all explanations I can think of, but even as I try to rationalize it, there are two pieces of proof, in addition to Michael Torrance's notebook, that will forever stop me from doing so. The first thing is the scar on my arm, the scar I carved into myself with a pocket knife as I tried to escape the nightmare I thought I was in. Even that could be explained by something else, despite my vivid memories. But the second is not possible. The diary signed by William James Gardner. I still have it. It is an undeniable symbol of the truth that I both cherish and hate. On one hand, it proves I'm not crazy, but on the other hand, maybe that would be a better choice. I found his family and discovered his story is the truth. He disappeared on the date he provided in his diary and was never found. I argued with myself about trying to contact his family. One part of me is sure they would welcome the closure, but I can't help but wonder, would they believe me? If someone claimed they knew what happened to a long-missing loved one of mine, and then proceeded to tell me this story, I can't imagine I wouldn't just look at that person as crazy. I have not made a decision on that yet. It's been a long road to recovery from this event, and I will admit it has not been easy. I was haunted by nightmares, panic attacks, flashbacks, and a lot of unfortunate bodily symptoms. Sometimes I thought I was completely crazy and had several stints in psychiatric facilities after mental breakdowns. It doesn't actually get easier. I just became better at coping with it. I wish I could tell all of you that I have made some heroic effort to destroy that place and stop the monsters in their stride. I wish I could tell you that thanks to Michael's selfless sacrifice, everyone is safe and everything will be fine now. I wish I could tell you that no one will ever disappear and end up there like I did. But I can't say those things because they are not true. The truth is, the intermediate world is real. I don't know how it is possible or if Michael's information is completely accurate, but that's all I have to rely on. I don't know what the odd man even is or what it is capable of, but it is clearly beyond us. If you have stayed this far, you may think of me as crazy. Maybe I am just an internet author who managed to entertain you a little. I'm not here to try to make anyone believe that what I experienced was real. I just hope you take some precautions next time you venture out alone in the woods. There are things out there that will never be explained, and forces operate in ways that we may never understand. Be safe out there. The thing is always watching.